Have you ever found yourself overwhelmed by sensations that others seem to navigate with ease? The subtle undercurrent of tension in a seemingly pleasant conversation. The unspoken grief hiding behind a colleague's professional smile. The complex web of motivations driving a simple group decision. The silent suffering contained within the structures of our society that most walk through without noticing. Perhaps you've experienced that moment of disorientation when you realize that what feels blindingly obvious to you remains completely invisible to those around you. This heightened sensitivity, this capacity to perceive what lies beneath the surface of ordinary interaction, often comes with a particular kind of suffering. It's not just that you feel more deeply or notice more details, but that you find yourself holding awareness that has no shared home, perceiving truths that cannot be easily expressed without disrupting the very social fabric you're trying to navigate. This experience of feeling too much, seeing too much, and subsequently suffering in silence isn't random or meaningless. According to the developmental framework pioneered by psychologist Jean Piaget, what you're experiencing has a name, a context, and a purpose in the evolution of human consciousness. It represents a natural stage in the development of more complex and integrated ways of constructing reality, one that comes with unique challenges but also extraordinary gifts. Piaget revolutionized our understanding of cognitive development by recognizing that human beings don't simply accumulate more information as they mature, but actually transform how they organize and interpret experience. Each developmental stage represents a qualitatively different way of constructing reality, with new capacities emerging that weren't available at previous stages. The heightened sensitivity that makes you feel like you're operating on a different frequency than those around you could be understood as a manifestation of more advanced perceptual structures, ones that allow you to register dimensions of experience that more conventional frameworks filter out or simplify. This isn't about being better or worse than others, but about navigating a different stage in the natural evolution of consciousness, one that comes with both opportunities and challenges that aren't shared by those operating from less complex perceptual frameworks. This sensitivity often begins as a gift. You notice nuances in relationships that allow for deeper connection. You perceive patterns in systems that help you navigate complex environments. You sense emotional currents that give you valuable information about what's really happening beneath social scripts. But at some point, many highly sensitive individuals discover the shadow side of this gift. When you consistently perceive more than the people around you, communication becomes challenging. How do you convey what you're sensing to someone whose perceptual framework doesn't include the same dimensions of awareness? How do you process emotions that arise from perceptions others don't share? The cognitive dissonance created by this perceptual gap often leads to self-doubt. You begin to wonder if you're imagining things, overreacting, or creating problems where none exist. This doubt compounds the original suffering, adding layers of internal conflict to the already challenging task of processing complex perceptions. In Piaget's framework, this experience correlates with what happens during transitions between developmental stages. He described how when children encounter information or experiences that don't fit their existing cognitive structures, they experience a state of disequilibrium, a kind of cognitive discomfort that motivates adaptation. This adaptation happens through twin processes: assimilation, where new information is fitted into existing frameworks, and accommodation, where the frameworks themselves must change to incorporate new realities. The heightened sensitivity you're experiencing creates a similar disequilibrium, but one that occurs not just within you but between you and the social environment. You're perceiving in ways that can't be easily assimilated into collective frameworks, creating pressure for accommodation that the social system often resists, leaving you caught in a persistent state of unresolved disequilibrium. I want to pause here and ask you directly, what has it been like for you to navigate this heightened sensitivity in a world that often doesn't share or validate your perceptions? How has it affected your relationships, your self-understanding, your sense of place in the world? If you feel called to share, leave a comment below beginning with "my experience of feeling too much as," and tell us about your journey. Your story may help others recognize that they're not alone in their heightened sensitivity, that what they've interpreted as personal failure or weakness might actually be an expression of developmental capacities not yet understood or valued by the broader culture. I read every comment, and your experiences matter not just to me, but to our whole community of sensitive perceivers finding their way in a world not designed for their level of awareness. This perceptual disequilibrium creates a particular kind of isolation. You may find yourself surrounded by people yet feeling fundamentally separate, holding perceptions that can't be easily shared or validated. This isolation isn't just emotionally painful, but developmentally challenging. Piaget recognized that cognitive development doesn't happen in a vacuum, but through interaction with an environment that both challenges and supports emerging structures of understanding. When your perceptions consistently exceed what your social environment can reflect back to you, you lack the external validation and refinement needed to fully integrate these perceptions. This creates a developmental catch-22. The very sensitivity that represents advanced perceptual development creates conditions that can impede the healthy integration of that development. The suffering that comes from this bind often happens in silence for several reasons. First, there's the basic challenge of articulation. Language itself is a consensus reality, with words carrying meanings that have been collectively agreed upon. When your perceptions exceed conventional frameworks, you may struggle to find words that can accurately convey what you're sensing. Second, there's a social risk of speaking perceptions that disrupt collective agreements about what is real or important. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures, and the threat of rejection or isolation that comes from challenging consensus reality can be genuinely threatening to our sense of safety and belonging. Finally, there's the uncertainty that comes from holding perceptions that aren't externally validated, without confirmation from others. It can be difficult to distinguish between genuine insight and projection or distortion, creating hesitation about expressing perceptions that you yourself aren't fully confident in. Despite these challenges, the heightened sensitivity you experience serves important developmental functions. Piaget observed that cognitive growth requires periods of disequilibrium, times when existing frameworks are challenged by experiences that can't be easily assimilated. The discomfort of these periods motivates the development of more complex and integrated cognitive structures capable of accommodating greater complexity. Similarly, your heightened sensitivity creates a necessary friction with conventional perception, a developmental pressure that motivates the construction of more sophisticated frameworks for organizing and interpreting experience. The suffering you feel isn't a punishment or a mistake, but a natural aspect of a growth process that's moving toward greater complexity and integration. This understanding doesn't magically eliminate the pain of feeling too much in a world that often feels too little, but it does place that pain in a developmental context that gives it meaning and purpose. Rather than interpreting your sensitivity as a flaw to overcome or a burden to bear, you can recognize it as an expression of perceptual development that's serving the evolution of your consciousness. This reframing doesn't require spiritual beliefs or metaphysical assumptions, though it's compatible with many such frameworks. It simply acknowledges what Piaget's research demonstrated so clearly, that human consciousness naturally evolves toward more complex and integrated forms of organization, and that this evolution involves challenging transitions as new capacities emerge and stabilize. The path forward isn't about becoming less sensitive, but about developing greater capacity to work with your sensitivity consciously and effectively. This involves several parallel processes. First, it means developing internal resources for processing complex perceptions without becoming overwhelmed by them. This might include contemplative practices that help you observe your perceptions with greater equanimity, creative outlets that allow you to express what can't be easily communicated in ordinary conversation, or conceptual frameworks that help you organize and make sense of what you're perceiving. Second, it means finding or creating contexts where your perceptions can be shared and validated by others with similar sensitivities. This might include relationships with specific individuals who share your perceptual capacities, communities of practice focused on developing awareness, or engagement with art, literature, or other forms of expression that reflect the dimensions of experience you're sensitive to. Most importantly, it means developing what we might call perceptual fluidity, the ability to move between different levels of perception without becoming rigidly identified with any particular framework. This parallels what Piaget recognized as a key feature of advanced cognitive development, the capacity for metacognition, for thinking about thinking itself. As this capacity develops, you become able to hold your perceptions with both conviction and humility, to recognize them as valid expressions of your experience, while acknowledging that they represent one way of constructing reality rather than absolute truth. This more flexible relationship with your own perception reduces the painful dissonance that comes from expecting others to see what you see or believing that your perception is the only valid one. If something in these words has resonated with your experience, if you felt that sense of recognition that comes when someone finally puts language to what you've been feeling, I invite you to join our community of sensitive perceivers walking this path together. By subscribing to this channel, you're connecting with others who understand what it means to feel deeply in a world that often stays on the surface, to see clearly what others miss or deny, to navigate the complexity of holding awareness that exceeds conventional frameworks. Each video is created as an offering to those with heightened sensitivity, providing perspectives and practices that might help you work more consciously and effectively with your perceptual gifts. This isn't about numbers or metrics, but about creating a space where sensitivity is recognized not as weakness, but as a developmental capacity with profound value for our collective evolution. The name for what you're experiencing, this heightened sensitivity that both connects you more deeply to life and sometimes separates you from others, has been called many things across different traditions and frameworks. In contemporary psychological language, it might be described as sensory processing sensitivity, empathic attunement, or cognitive complexity. In more traditional contexts, it might be called intuitive knowing, spiritual discernment, or perceptual giftedness. From a Piagetian developmental perspective, we can understand it as an expression of more complex cognitive structures that allow for perception of dimensions of experience not accessible to conventional frameworks. The specific name matters less than the recognition that what you're experiencing has a place in the spectrum of human development, that it represents not a flaw or defect, but a particular configuration of perceptual capacities that comes with both unique challenges and extraordinary gifts. Your sensitivity doesn't need to be fixed or overcome, but it does need to be understood and worked with consciously if it's to serve rather than hinder your development. This understanding begins with the recognition that feeling deeply, seeing clearly, and sometimes suffering from what you perceive doesn't make you broken. It makes you human in a particular way, experiencing a specific configuration of perceptual capacities that both connects you more intimately with certain dimensions of reality and creates unique challenges in relating to consensus frameworks. With this understanding, you can begin to develop practices and perspectives that help you navigate your sensitivity more effectively, to find balance between honoring your perceptions and maintaining connection with others who may not share them, to transform the isolation of seeing too much into the gift of contributing unique perspective to our collective understanding. As we continue to explore this territory together, remember that the path of heightened sensitivity has been walked by many before you, even when it wasn't named or understood as it might be today. Throughout human history, there have been those who perceived beyond conventional boundaries, who felt the suffering that others couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge, who saw patterns and possibilities invisible to the majority. These sensitive perceivers have often played crucial roles in human development, serving as visionaries, healers, artists, and innovators whose expanded awareness contributed to our collective evolution. You stand in this lineage, and your sensitivity, challenging as it sometimes is, represents a necessary aspect of our shared capacity for growth and transformation. By developing the ability to work consciously with your perceptual gifts, you not only ease your own suffering, but contribute to the expansion of what's perceptible and expressible within our collective experience.